Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbard. In today's edition of Utterly Pointless Comparisons, I'll be taking a look at the arcade and NES versions of Mario Bros. Just plain old Mario Bros. But did you know that this game received a second, more enhanced port in 1988 for the NES?
What?
So I guess we better take a look at that one too, huh? Here are the arcade and NES hardware specs while I tell you just a bit about the game itself. Nintendo released Mario Bros. Into the arcades in mid-1983. In keeping with their new tradition, the game didn't play anything like the games that featured Mario before it. That is to say, it was not like Donkey Kong or Donkey Kong Jr. In Mario Bros., the point of the game is to knock enemies onto their back and then kick them off screen. This also added two-player simultaneous play. Kick enough enemies off screen and you clear one phase and move on to the next. As you advance in phases, more enemies or obstacles are added. Now, Nintendo released their port of Mario Bros. To the Famicom in Japan on September 9th of 1983. So this was a port of a real recent arcade game at the time it came out. And, well, it's not super great.
What?
Mario Bros. For the Famicom has so much flicker, you'll probably think there's something wrong with your eyes and want to schedule an immediate appointment with your optometrist. Mario Bros. For the Famicom has sprites that are so small they can only be seen by the world's most powerful microscopes. On top of all this, Nintendo added these truly awful, grating tones that play whenever Mario walks in this game, and they have cruelly stripped out various elements from the arcade game.
Get the hell out of here!
So did Nintendo fix any of these problems when the game was fully released in America for the NES 3 years later in 1986? No, they didn't. We got the same mediocre port that Japan got in 1983. But Nintendo would revisit this game in a re-release of sorts for the Famicom Disk Writer system in Japan in 1988. Now this was one of those things where you had to go into a kiosk in Japan, insert a disc, put in like $5 or so, it would write the game to the disc that you could then take home and play. Now this was one of those times where you got a package that included a bunch of stuff, including ads for a Japanese food company. Yes, really, and the game was only a part of it. But the game was greatly enhanced from the original 1983 Famicom release. We didn't have to deal with any more teeny tiny characters. No, now they were roughly the same size as they were in the arcade original. All those little instructional cutscenes that happened before levels in the arcade game have been added into this Famicom release. Nintendo also went the extra mile and actually enhanced the game a little bit so that you can control Mario slightly when he jumps. Now, Nintendo took that version of the game and stripped out everything except for the basic game itself and released it in Europe as Mario Bros. Arcade Classics series. Unfortunately, we never got a release of this game in the US. Why? I can only assume because Nintendo hates us.
I hate you! I've always hated you!
But really, retro games weren't so much of a thing at that time. Old games were really viewed as more obsolete, which is probably why we never got it. So I don't have a lot to tell you about recording methodology for this one. I just played the arcade game through about phase 16, which is pretty much the point where new things stop being introduced. And for the home versions, I played them a little bit longer because the levels don't sync up exactly with the arcade version. Alright, on to the comparison. Here we go. I'm going to start out looking at the classic update for the NES version, because this one has the little opening cutscenes with instructions that are missing from the original NES release. So you can see here in the classic update, the turtles look a little different, or shell creepers. Don't have quite the same colors, they look a little bit more like Koopa Troopas from Super Mario Bros. Now, here we are on the original release for the NES, and you can see it looks a lot different. The backgrounds are basically the same, but the turtles are itty-bitty teeny tiny. They're also missing the animation where if you let them sit too long after you knock them over, they would get out of their shell and they'd be in like an undershirt and stuff, and they'd switch into a new shell. That's something that was added back into the classic release. As far as differences go here, we can see the pipes look a little bit different in both versions. In the arcade one, the top pipes are taller, and in the arcade version, the pipes are a little bit thinner. They have less of a circumference. In the NES versions, they're a little bit wider, and hilariously, for the pipes at the bottom, things have to jump into them because they're not level with the ground. What we're seeing there real quick is the classic version has an extra stage. Alright, here's our first bonus stage. This is the classic update, and for some reason, they still didn't bother rounding the edges in this area. Here's our next little instruction cutscene. These are missing entirely from the original 1983 release. Now we've got our crabs, or sidesteppers. Now you'll notice in the NES Classic series, the crabs animate a lot faster. So the speed that they wiggle their claws up and down more closely matches the arcade crabs when they're angry after you damage them once. Now, another thing I didn't mention before about the pipes is the arcade pipes have wheels on them for the top pipes. And those are missing from both NES releases. You can really see in the original release here, even though everything's tiny, there's just a ton of flicker, even when there's not a lot of sprites on the same line. Clearly, Nintendo had not really gotten to grips yet with the system at this point. And look how itty-bitty the fireballs are in the original NES release. So tiny! Alright, here's our next cutscene. Alright, here we have our fighter flies. As it said, you can only hit them when they're on the ground. Let's talk about sound just for a second here. The arcade, the walking sound, it's a little too loud in emulation. I could probably adjust that, but I didn't really feel like messing with it. But the sound in the arcade version is pretty good. You have a lot of nice deep sounds and everything. On the NES, I hate that they added the little musical tones when he walks. It drives me insane. Other than that, the sound is fine in the NES releases. Look how small and thin the fighter flies are on NES. That's the original release again. Here we are back to the classic update. For all the things they did add to the classic release, like making all the enemies look a lot better and the fireballs basically the right size, it's kind of hard to understand why they didn't go and polish up the rest of the stuff. Like move the pipes on the bottom down so they're level with the bricks, and add the wheels to the pipes on top. Here's the little slip ice monsters. Now I did edit some things here in that this stage happens later on the NES Classic release than it does in the arcade version. So I backed it up so it's taking place in the same spot. Alright, here we are back to the original NES release with the teeny tiny weirdly animated turtles, or show creepers. Now the original NES release, the level count stays the same as the arcade one for the first few levels. but it diverges pretty radically in just a few levels past this, and you'll see what I mean. For the classic re-release from 1988, the levels more closely match the arcade game, but they're sort of offset by one, because that third level on the NES version with the turtles is extra. So much flicker in that first NES release. Man, this is dramatically better. I really wish they would have released this in the West, or at least put it on maybe a compilation cartridge with something else to make it worth $20 or $30. I mean, it's so much better than the original. You can see the slip ices do their thing in both versions of the game. These are nice large fireballs on the NES. Here we are back to the original release. Pretty obvious whenever that happens because there's suddenly a ton of flicker on the screen. There's a death on that one again. How thin and sad the slip ices look. At least they do perform their function and change the ground into ice. Look at those teeny tiny fireballs again! Oh, goodness! I don't know whether those teeny tiny fireballs are terrible or adorable. Here we are back to the classic series release. Again, this one was from 1988. Yeah, pretty clear that Nintendo had learned a few things about NES programming during the interim. One thing I really wish they had changed for the classic series re-release was the walking sound. As far as cartridge size goes, if you didn't catch that earlier, the classic series re-release, it's about 41 kilobytes. But yeah, just imagine a re-release in 1988 with closer arcade versions of Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., and this. That would have been a great release. Now, it's true that people weren't getting as many of the older games at that time, and older games were just viewed as basically obsolete. Clearly, it takes a little while for the nostalgia to set in for most people. Now, one thing I haven't talked too much about is the original Japanese release of this game. So yeah, I told you it was on the Famicom disc writer and that you got it at a kiosk, so you know all that already. But it's really something that's kind of worthy of its own episode. There's so much stuff in it just related to this food manufacturer and the way it's integrated in different ways into all the software that's on the disc. It's kind of funny, and it's really worth looking at. I don't know if I'm going to cover it in the future, but it's worth checking out and tracking down if you have never seen it before. I also find it strange that most of the re-releases of the NES version of Mario Bros. Instead of the NES Arcade Classic Series version. I mean, you've already got this game. This should be the only one that's released anymore these days. So don't worry, we're almost at the end here. I only do a couple of more phases before I stop. Basically, I went as long as the game was throwing new things at me. Here you can see, even in the classic release, it's a little bit different. The ground is all ice when you begin this level in the arcade version, and it's just the plain ground in the classic release. This is phase 14 in the original NES version, but this is the equivalent level, I promise. As you can see, the top platforms are not frozen over in that version, they're just normal, while in the arcade version they're sort of frozen and they leak ice. Big, pointy, sharp icicles that will instantly kill you. If we go look at the classic release from 1988, they added that back into the game. Alright, so there you have it, a very detailed look at the arcade and NES releases of Mario Bros. Now, Mario Bros. Is a game that was released on many different platforms, and I will be revisiting this title on different platforms in the future. Now, personally, growing up, I spent the most time by far playing the Commodore 64 version released by AtariSoft. What version of Mario Bros. Was your favorite at the time? Tell me all about it in the comments. And that'll bring us to the end of another video, my retro gaming friends. If you enjoyed the video, please toss it a like and share it. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you'll know as soon as more retro gaming goodness is available. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.